For the rest of my life, I will probably never forget that afternoon. The afternoon when, just because of a handbag, I received 3 hard slaps in the middle of a crowded mall. Under the gaze of so many strangers, I never expected that the man I was about to marry could be so heartless and raise his hand to me without hesitation. That afternoon, after months of nonstop overtime, I decided to reward myself with a genuine leather handbag. It wasn't a luxury brand with an exorbitant price tag. It was just a bag that fit within the budget I had managed to set aside. I had been planning our wedding, calculating every expense, and being frugal at every opportunity. To me, the bag wasn't a waste of money, but a small token of appreciation for myself before stepping into married life. I still vividly remember the joy I felt as the sales associate neatly wrapped it. I even smiled, thinking that once I became a wife, I would rarely get the chance to buy something for myself like this. As soon as I stepped out of the store, I saw Grant, my fiancé, standing a few yards away. His arms were crossed, his eyes glaring sharply at the bag in my hand. His look showed absolutely no joy or curiosity. Instead, he looked at me as if I had just committed a massive crime. I originally intended to smile and proudly tell him that I bought it with my own savings. But before I could even open my mouth, he asked in a cold tone, "Where did you get the money to buy this?" I was a little startled but answered calmly, "This is from my own hard-earned money, my own savings." I thought it was a perfectly reasonable answer. I didn't ask anyone for money and I didn't owe anyone a dime. I was simply using the fruits of my own labor. But the moment I finished my sentence, smack, the first slap landed on my cheek. I was paralyzed. My entire body felt as if it had frozen and my ears felt hot and started ringing. Grant growled. "That money should have been used to buy a gift for my mom and dad. Instead, you squandered it." I hadn't even processed what was happening or had the chance to react when the second slap followed. My vision spun. The sales associate behind me stood frozen, her mouth wide open. A few passers-by stopped and stared at us in shock. The third slap made me stumble, almost falling to the ground. Grant grabbed my wrist tightly. His voice hissed, "If you're this selfish, we shouldn't get married. I'm calling off the wedding." I heard every word clearly. Every word felt cold and piercing. Calling off the wedding. Just because I bought a bag with my own money. I raised my head to look at him, not with anger or fear, but with profound disappointment. The man standing before me was no longer the person who had once confessed his love and promised to build a family with me. Before me stood a calculating, controlling stranger. I asked in a low, choked voice, "Do I have to ask for permission to use my own money?" It wasn't a challenge. I just wanted to confirm the reality of what was happening. But Grant yelled, completely disregarding the fact that we were in a public place. "Once we are married, your money is our money. You need to know your priorities. My parents worked hard to raise me. You're about to become part of this family. Don't you have a brain?" My heart turned to ice hearing that. My hard-earned money was automatically considered an asset to be surrendered to his control. Suddenly, I realized the bag was just a trigger. What he truly wanted was total control over me. I looked around at the crowd, seeing their curious and pitying stares. I felt that not only my face had been slapped, but my dignity as well. Yet instead of crying or fighting back, I laughed. A laugh that made Grant fall silent for a few seconds. He probably thought I was scared or remorseful. But no, that laugh was the moment I woke up. I realized that if I stayed silent today, if I apologized for using my own money today, then for the rest of my life, I would have to ask for permission just to breathe, to live, to be myself inside a family where I was only viewed as someone with obligations. Grant kept talking about responsibility duties and being a supportive partner, but I was no longer listening. In my head, there was only one thought. If it's already like this before the wedding, what will happen after? Those 3 slaps hurt, yes. But what hurt more was the realization that I had almost walked into a marriage where I was entirely disrespected. I gently pried my wrist from his grip and bent down to pick up my bag. I looked him straight in the eye and said slowly, "You want to call off the wedding? Fine, but you don't have to." He was stunned, probably not understanding what I meant. I didn't say another word. I turned around and walked away, leaving the crowded mall behind. My cheek still burned, but strangely, my heart felt so much lighter. He had no idea that within the next 24 hours, I would be the one officially announcing the cancellation of this wedding. And that decision wouldn't just make Grant go pale, it would force his entire family to face their own true colors. It all started from those 3 slaps. 3 slaps that woke me up before it was too late. I walked out of the mall with my body still trembling. My cheek felt like it was on fire. I didn't cry right away. Not because I was strong, but because I still couldn't believe that what just happened was real. They say there is a kind of shock that makes a person freeze first. It wasn't until I arrived home and closed the door that all my emotions exploded. I sat alone for a long time, staring at the bag, sitting on the table, as if it were a piece of evidence. Then, in my head, fragments of old memories began to surface. It was as if fate was forcing me to review everything from the beginning and ask myself where I had gone wrong. I met Grant through a cousin. I was told he was a good guy, had a stable job, and came from a respectable family. I was over 30 at the time. My parents never pressured me, but occasionally they would sigh, hinting that since I was a grown woman, it would be good to have a life partner. I was never the romantic type or someone who believed in love at first sight. I just thought that meeting a good person and building a family together would be enough. Grant was 4 years older than me, a sales manager. On our first date, he was well-spoken. He was observant and knew how to hold a conversation. He wasn't impulsive like the men I had met before, nor was he cold or distant. He seemed polite and made me feel comfortable. At first, Grant would often pick me up after work, buy me coffee, and ask about my day. Once I was busy with accounting work until late at night. He waited patiently at a cafe near my office, sending a simple text. "Take your time, don't rush. I can wait." Reading that message warmed my heart. I thought a man patient enough to wait like this must also be someone who respects others. Occasionally, he would say things that sounded visionary. I like women who care about family. Hearing that, I just smiled. Who wouldn't like someone attentive and good at managing a household? I thought I was already used to taking care of everything, so it wouldn't be difficult. As for me, I worked as an accountant at a construction supply company. My salary wasn't huge, but it was stable. I had been independent for a long time. My family wasn't wealthy, and I never relied on anyone. I had some savings, not a fortune, but enough to make me feel secure in case of emergencies. I always believed that a woman could be gentle, but she must have dignity and the ability to stand on her own 2 feet. I never intended to marry just to find someone to depend on financially. I just wanted a real marriage, a place to share my life with someone. When our relationship grew serious, our families met. The first meeting was at Grant's house. His mother, Brenda, was dressed very neatly, her hair perfectly styled. She looked me up and down as if evaluating a piece of merchandise. Her gaze made me a bit uncomfortable, but I remained polite. We hadn't been sitting long when she immediately asked, in a voice that wasn't loud but sharp, "So, Amelia, what's your salary like?" I froze for a moment. It was such a tacky question. Usually parents ask about your job, your passions, or your health. But she went straight to money. I looked at Grant, hoping he would step in, but he just offered a thin smile as if it were perfectly normal. I kept my smile and answered honestly, figuring there was no point in hiding it. Brenda nodded, but her eyes weren't friendly. It was as if she simply recorded a number in her head for calculation purposes. After that meeting, Grant drove me home. On the way, he held my hand and said, "My mom is just like that. She likes asking for details, but she's just looking out for us." I just agreed because I didn't want to start the relationship with suspicion. A few days later, his family came over for the official engagement proposal. The atmosphere was joyful. The parents talked and laughed. Relatives congratulated us. I felt relieved, thinking everything would go smoothly. But it was right after the engagement that Grant started talking more often about the responsibilities of being a family. At first, it was just light reminders. "When you're around my parents, just be mindful of what you say. They're a bit old-fashioned." I listened and nodded, understanding that you have to be considerate with in-laws. But slowly, Grant's conversations shifted. He frequently said, "My mom and dad sacrificed their whole lives for me. When you become my wife, you must treat them as your top priority." Hearing that, I still tried to stay positive. I was even glad, thinking I was marrying a man devoted to his parents. I thought someone grateful to his family would surely be responsible toward his wife. How naive I was back then. I didn't realize that the line between filial piety and forcing a wife into submission is razor thin, and Grant was using devotion as a mask to condition me into complete obedience. As the wedding approached, it felt like our conversations only revolved around one thing: money. More specifically, my money. He didn't always ask directly. He'd ask subtly, framing it as care. "How much are your savings now? How much are you planning to contribute to the wedding? After we get married, we need to make a solid financial plan." It sounded like a man with a vision, but it started to feel strange because he never asked, "How much do we have?" He always emphasized, "How much do you have?" He never said, "Let's manage this together," but rather, "You need to understand our priorities." And every time I tried to discuss my personal plans, the conversation was always diverted to gifts for his parents and responsibilities toward his family. Even so, I tried to calm myself down. I thought maybe I was just being too sensitive, or maybe the wedding preparations were making everyone tense. I even told myself, maybe men just think about finances more. I didn't want to suspect my fiancé. I didn't want my parents to worry. I tried to look at everything from the brightest perspective, but I had no idea that it was all just the beginning of a series of calculations they had secretly mapped out for my life. Even while I still believed I was stepping into a warm marriage, those 3 slaps in the middle of the mall tore away all the pretense, making me see one thing clearly: I had trusted the wrong person. After the engagement, everything moved faster than I expected. People started calling me a bride-to-be, and I started learning how to live in the role of a future wife. I kept working as usual, kept being frugal, and planned every expense for the wedding. But since getting engaged, I felt Grant had changed drastically. He no longer asked about my work or health. Instead, he constantly brought up money, how to manage it, and how husband and wife are one entity. One night, while we were having dinner at my place, Grant casually asked, "Which bank do you use?" I looked up a bit, startled. Usually people ask, "Do you have savings?" Not such a specific question. I smiled to cover the awkwardness. "I'm with Chase. I use their mobile app." He nodded as if he had gathered the information he needed, then asked in the same casual tone, "And the password? You have it written down somewhere." I put down my fork and spoon, staring at him. "Why are you asking in such detail?" Grant laughed. "Well, we're going to be husband and wife. We have to be transparent. I just want to know so I can help plan." I tried to remain calm. I didn't want to make money a sensitive topic, but I felt something was off. It felt like someone had just tried to pick the lock to my privacy. And sure enough, a few days later, Grant suggested we merge all our wedding funds into one joint account. His reasoning sounded logical. "Let's just put it all in one place so it's more organized and easier to track. There will be a lot of expenses. Let me manage it so it stays neat." I was silent for a moment before replying slowly. "Let me hold on to my portion of the money. If we need something, we can discuss it together. I'm not comfortable with one person holding all the funds." I said this not out of suspicion, but because I was used to managing my own finances. I believed a family should be built on joint discussions, not with one person holding absolute control while the other is merely informed. Grant didn't get angry right away. He gave me the silent treatment for a few days, acting sulky but protecting his pride. Then one night he sent a short text. "You're going to be my wife. Why are you still so secretive with your money?" Reading that message, my heart sank. The word secretive felt so heavy. It made me sound selfish, like I was hiding something and didn't trust him. I called him to explain. "I'm not being secretive. I just want everything to be clear so we can make decisions together." Grant cut me off. "How is it clear if the money is still in your hands? If a husband and wife still keep things separate like this, what's the point of getting married?" I started feeling pressured, but I still tried to keep my cool. Maybe men easily get offended, I thought. I should just be gentler. But the problems didn't stop there. Since that day, his mother Brenda started calling me more often. Initially, she'd make small talk. "How's work? How are the wedding preps?" I was happy thinking she cared. But after a few sentences, she would inevitably pivot to money. She lectured me as if reading from a rule book. "A woman needs to be smart about saving for her husband's family. You're about to be married. Don't be so frivolous anymore." I offered a tight smile. "Yes, Brenda, I know." She continued, her voice sweet but sharp. "After you get married, just give your paycheck to Grant. Men are better at managing money. Women have soft hearts. They get easily tempted to shop." Hearing that sent a chill down my spine. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't preparing for a marriage, but preparing to hand over my entire life to be managed by someone else. I asked Grant about it. I hoped he would say, "It's fine, honey. We'll manage it ourselves." But Grant replied casually, as if it were a given. "My mom has a point. If I manage it, you won't have a headache." I stared at him and asked myself, what about me? I work, I earn the money, but I won't have a headache by surrendering all my rights to him. From that day on, I became cautious. I stopped sharing the exact details of my savings, stopped telling him when my paycheck arrived, and stopped casually discussing my future shopping plans. Not because I was secretive or wanted to hide things, but because I felt unsafe. I felt like I was being shoved into a box where everything that belonged to me, from my hard work and money to my personal choices, required permission. I still loved Grant in the way a woman wants to trust her impending marriage, but I couldn't lie to myself that their words were just forms of concern. What made me most uncomfortable was how Grant started policing the little things. Every time I bought something for myself, even if it was just a bottle of moisturizer or a work shirt, he would interrogate me. "How much was this? Where did you buy it? Was it necessary?" Once I bought a pair of shoes on sale. He saw the receipt and frowned. Why buy more? We are getting married. There are so many things to take care of, I explained. My old shoes were ruined, and I bought cheap ones. Grant wouldn't accept it. Cheap is still money. If you keep being wasteful like this, you'll be a burden to the whole family after we're married. Sentences like that piled up little by little. I didn't react strongly because I was afraid of causing drama right before the wedding. I kept reminding myself, maybe he's just worried about our future. But the more I reminded myself, the tighter my chest felt. There were nights when I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if all the money I earn has to be handed over to my husband, if every item I buy is interrogated, if every decision must prioritize my husband's family like they say. Then how am I supposed to live? I ignored all the red flags because I was too busy believing that everything would be fine after the wedding. But deep down, the intuition that I was heading toward a massive mistake kept haunting me like a dark cloud. And when the mall incident happened, I finally realized it wasn't a dark cloud, it was a hurricane. Ever since our arguments over money, the dynamic between Grant and me was no longer comfortable. On the surface, everything was going according to the wedding plan. Pre-wedding photo shoots, picking a date, booking the venue, fitting the dress. But inside, my happiness was rapidly draining. I'm not a pessimist, but the closer the wedding got, the more I felt like I was being pulled into a machine where my voice shrank while the rules of my husband's family expanded. About a month before the wedding, Brenda called me to her house saying there was something we needed to discuss to ensure everything went smoothly. I arrived respectfully, assuming we were just going to talk about the event schedule. As soon as I sat down, she pulled out a long sheet of paper and placed it in front of me. She said curtly, "This is the list of expenses for the rehearsal dinner. Look it over and let me know when you can cover it." I looked down and saw a long list of items for a lavish party, a top-tier caterer, an open bar, custom floral arrangements, even a string quartet. The guest list was almost entirely their relatives, many of whom I had never even met. I looked up a bit, stunned. "Excuse me, Brenda, but shouldn't our families be splitting the wedding costs?" Brenda looked at me as if I were a clueless child. Then she stated clearly, "It's tradition for the groom's family to host the rehearsal dinner, but a supportive bride helps make sure it reflects well on everyone. We want to make a good impression. If we do this right, they will respect you later." The implication that I had to pay for their party to earn their family's respect made me choke. Previously, both families had met and agreed to split most of the costs evenly, to be fair. I clearly remember my parents saying, "Our family isn't wealthy, but we want to contribute our fair share." Now this list suddenly appeared before me like an order masked with the excuse of making a good impression. I turned to Grant hoping he would say something to defuse this ridiculous situation, but he just nodded in agreement. "Mom is right, just take care of it, honey. It'll make us look good. We can't let our family look cheap." I heard the words "our family" and felt the irony. Which family, mine or his? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we should revisit the budget, because both our families previously agreed to share the costs. Besides, this list is excessive. We should pick something more reasonable." I said it not to dodge the responsibility, but because I felt it was incredibly unfair. But Grant immediately frowned, his voice laced with annoyance. "If you're going to be this cheap about it, it makes me wonder if you're really committed to this marriage." That sentence felt like an invisible slap. Not only did he accuse me of being cheap, but he subtly implied that I should be grateful he was even willing to marry me. I was silent for a few seconds. Brenda gave a cynical smile, the smile of someone used to giving orders and disliking being contradicted. She delivered a line that sounded gentle but was full of pressure. "A woman who is about to get married shouldn't argue so much. Just do it. For the sake of keeping the peace." I realized that in her eyes, keeping the peace meant I had to stay silent, submit, and obey. From that day on, every time I met Grant, he always repeated the same theme. A woman must know how to sacrifice, sometimes sacrificing money, sometimes hobbies, sometimes time. Once I mentioned that after we were married, I planned to maintain a personal savings account as an emergency fund. He immediately scowled. "An emergency fund for what? You're going to be married. Why do you still need an escape plan? You should be thinking about the family." Before I could even answer, he concluded, "A woman who always prepares a way out for herself is selfish." Hearing that made my chest tight. An escape plan isn't for betrayal. It's so you don't end up cornered and helpless. But I knew if I argued, he would accuse me again of not trusting my future husband. It was also around this time that I noticed the way Grant looked at me whenever I talked about my personal goals. He used to encourage me to excel at work. Now, whenever I brought up taking extra courses, getting a side hustle, or wanting to buy something for myself, his eyes grew dark, as if I had just said something forbidden. I once casually mentioned wanting to get a CPA certification so my career prospects would be better, I said it sincerely. I'm studying so our income will be better later, so the financial burden is lighter for both of us. But Grant replied without missing a beat. You're getting married. Why do you still need to focus so much on your career? I was taken aback. Why not? He shrugged. After you're married, you take care of the house, take care of mom and dad. If you're studying all the time, you'll be tired. Then who will take care of the family? Hearing that, I felt a deep sense of despair. I tried to joke to lighten the mood. Well, I'm not a housekeeper. I said it half jokingly, but Grant instantly put on a cold face and lowered his voice. Don't talk like that. That short sentence gave me goosebumps. It wasn't advice. It was a warning. As if I had just broken an unwritten rule in his family's law. Riding in his car on the way home that day, I felt completely hollow. I remembered the early days of our relationship. Grant once said he would respect me, that he would let me make my own decisions. But the closer the wedding got, the more he showed his dominant side, the more he wanted me to shrink myself. I began to realize that the sweet man from the beginning was probably just a mask. Once he was sure I was locked into his life, he didn't need to pretend anymore. And amidst all that mounting pressure, the bag I bought that day was truly just the final drop that made the cup overflow. It wasn't the bag that woke me up. It was the way he slapped me, humiliated me, and threatened to call off the wedding just because I used my own money. All the demanded sacrifices, the unreasonable party costs the line if you're going to be this cheap, the controlling gazes all exploded into 3 slaps in the middle of a crowd. I realized this wasn't a coincidence. This was pressure built up little by little, leading to the day where I would have no choice but to either keep enduring and become a shadow or walk away to save myself. The 3 consecutive slaps left my ears ringing, but strangely no tears fell. I stood frozen in the middle of the mall lobby. My hands gripped the straps of the bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sting on my cheek faded away. All that was left was a freezing cold radiating from my chest to my neck. It was as if someone had just dumped a bucket of ice over my dignity. I raised my head, staring at Grant, examining him as if to make sure I was looking at the right person. Then I asked in a voice that was hoarse but clear, "What do you think I am?" Grant didn't answer the question. He just smirked, looking at me like I was a stubborn child, and then spoke loudly in public deliberately so others would hear and take his side. If you can't even think about my mom and dad, what's the point of us getting married? Hearing that felt like my heart was being crushed. I had never been disrespectful to anyone, never acted impolitely toward his mother. I had merely bought a bag with my own hard-earned money, yet from his mouth I was painted as thoughtless, someone unfit for marriage. Before I could speak, Grant pulled out his phone and called his mother right in front of me. His voice was no longer emotional but cold and calculating, as if he were holding a trial in the middle of the lobby. "Mom, it looks like we need to reconsider this wedding." I stood there, my cheek burning but my heart ice cold. I realized he didn't just want to threaten me. He wanted to involve his mother to pressure me together, to turn me into the guilty party in front of his family. Just seconds later, Brenda's voice came through the speakerphone loud and sharp as a knife. She spoke loudly enough so that I and the people around us could hear. "Marrying a woman like that will only bring trouble to the family." That single sentence felt like another slap. Not to my face, but to my honor. Bring trouble. I hadn't even stepped foot into their house, hadn't done a single thing wrong, yet they were already branding me a walking disaster. The woman didn't ask what happened, didn't ask what her son had done. She immediately defended him and passed judgment on me. I looked around, seeing curious eyes and hearing whispers. I knew people probably didn't understand the context. They probably thought I was a wasteful girl being disciplined by her future husband. The feeling of being misunderstood in a crowd was even more painful than the sting on my cheek. I stood there, swallowing the bitter taste in my mouth, telling myself not to cry. Not out of pride, but because if I cried now, they would be even more convinced that I was in the wrong, and I would be cornered into apologizing just to save the wedding. At that exact moment, one thing became crystal clear to me. So clear that I could no longer lie to myself. This bag was never the issue. The issue was that they wanted me to obediently hand over everything. Today they used the bag as my first lesson. Your money is no longer yours. Tomorrow they would use another excuse for a second lesson. Your mouth cannot talk back. Then a third lesson, a fourth, until I was no longer Amelia but merely a submissive shadow. I bent down, picked up the dropped bag, and brushed it off as if dusting away dirt. But in reality, I was brushing away the last remnants of my illusions. I raised my head, stared at Grant for a long time, and asked again in an unnervingly calm voice, "You just slapped me because I used my own money." Grant glared at me without an ounce of shame. He answered coldly, "That money should have been for a gift for my parents. That sentence was the final nail in the coffin. Hearing it, I no longer wanted to explain myself. I no longer needed to prove whether I was right or wrong. Because for someone like him, even if I was right, I would still be wrong if I didn't submit. I smiled again. But this time it wasn't a patient smile or an attempt to diffuse the situation. It was the smile of someone who had just made a definitive decision. I looked straight at him and said slowly, "Go ahead. Call off the wedding." Grant froze. He probably didn't expect me to have the guts to say that. He thought I would panic, cry, and beg him not to leave. He thought I would be terrified of the stigma of a failed engagement, afraid of becoming the subject of family gossip. But at that precise moment, I just felt relieved. An odd sense of relief, like someone who had just managed to escape a door that was about to be locked from the outside. Grant growled. "Say that again?" I replied briefly. I said, "Go ahead and cancel it. But don't you ever think you have the right to slap me and still force me to bow down to you?" He stepped forward, his face flushed red. "You think you're so tough, huh? Let's see how you face anyone after this humiliation." I didn't let him finish. I just looked at him and delivered one casual, yet probably deeply cutting sentence. "Don't worry about my face. Worry about your own character." After saying that, I turned and walked away. Every step felt heavy yet light. Heavy because I was severing a destiny that had seemed so certain. Light because I knew I had just avoided a bottomless pit. I walked straight to the parking garage, got into my car, and sat in silence for a few minutes to catch my breath. The air freshener clinging to my clothes made me nauseous. I wiped my face, looked in the rearview mirror, and saw the red finger marks on my cheek. To others, those marks might be a disgrace, but to me they were a warning. And that very night, I did something that made Grant and his entire family go pale. Something they never expected me to do. Not retaliating with a punch, not with curses, and certainly not with tears. I did only one thing. I brought the truth right to their doorstep, so they could no longer use my silence as a weapon to oppress me. That was the moment I knew I had changed. I was no longer the Amelia who always tried to protect everyone's feelings. I was the Amelia brave enough to save herself, before it was too late. That night I arrived home with my body still trembling. I washed my face, looked in the mirror, and saw the red marks still lingering on my cheek. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bag, sitting on the corner of the table. It no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a marker. A marker of the moment I realized that some things, if not cut off now, will cut us down later. I didn't tell my parents right away, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I needed to calm down first. I knew if I came home crying, my parents would be heartbroken and worried. I took my phone and replayed the video I had managed to record when Grant started raising his voice. In the recording, the sharp smack was clearly audible, followed by his firm voice. That money should have been for a gift for my mom and dad. I watched it once, twice, 3 times. Every time, my heart stung. But at the same time, a strange resolve emerged. I asked myself, if I stay silent, how long will I have to keep staying silent? And I realized that my silence was exactly what gave them the opportunity to make me the guilty party. I opened the family group chat, the one that was once lively with congratulations and engagement photos. I also opened a private chat with Grant's parents. My hands shook, but I hit send anyway. I sent the video with just one short sentence, without long explanations or complaints. If this is the type of husband I am going to have, I am stepping away. I didn't add any other words because I knew the more I explained, the more loopholes they would find to twist the facts. The truth itself was enough. Less than a minute later, my phone vibrated violently. Grant was calling. I didn't answer. He called again. I stared at the phone screen with a heart that was strangely calm, as if all the fear had vanished along with the 3 slaps that afternoon. After the 5th missed call, texts started flooding in. Short and demanding. "You're insane. Delete it right now. Are you trying to ruin everything?" I read the messages and laughed, a bitter laugh. The person who had just struck me in public was now ordering me to delete the evidence to protect his reputation. He kept calling I don't know how many times. Later, checking my call log, I found he had called over 15 times in an hour. I still didn't answer. I only replied with one sentence that served as the seal on my decision. "You're the one who wanted to call off the wedding, right? I'm just helping you speed up the process." After sending that, I placed the phone on the table, like putting down a heavy stone. Everything was clear. There was no room for negotiation. A moment later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Brenda's number. I took a deep breath and answered it. Her voice was harsh, yelling the second the line connected. "What kind of person does this? You have no class. Taking private matters public until everyone knows I no longer felt afraid." I answered firmly. My voice didn't rise, but every word was steady. 3 slaps in the middle of a mall is not a private matter, Brenda. There was a brief silence on the other end, then she growled, "Don't talk back to me. By doing this, you are ruining our family's good name. Do you know how people will look at us?" I answered calmly, "You are worried about how people will look at your family, but when my parents' child was hit, did you worry about what would happen to her?" She choked, then shifted her tactics to give advice. Men can lose control when they're emotional. Why blow a small issue out of proportion? A woman needs to be patient if she wants her marriage to last. Hearing the word patient, I felt cold. I asked back very slowly, "How long do you want me to be patient? Patient enough to take 1 slap or patient for the rest of my life?" "You insolent girl," she snapped. I replied, "No, Brenda. I am just defending myself." The call ended with Brenda's fury. But I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, Grant sent another text. This time, his tone completely shifted to a fake sweetness. "Amelia, I was emotional earlier. Let's not blow this out of proportion, okay? Please delete the video. I'll come over later to apologize. Let's talk this over." I stared at the word apologize and found it ironic. An apology that comes with the condition delete the video is not an apology. It's coercion. Before I could even reply, about half an hour later, his attitude flipped 180 degrees again. The next message came fast, short, and venomous. "If you don't delete that video, I will tell everyone you scammed me out of my money." I froze for a second. Scammed, I never asked for a single cent from him. I worked, supported myself, and even paid for my portion of the wedding out of my own pocket. A chill ran down my spine. Not out of fear, but because I finally saw this man's true colors. When he couldn't force me the nice way, he resorted to threats. When the easy way failed, he wouldn't hesitate to fabricate a story to turn the tables. I replied, this time entirely devoid of emotion, operating only on pure clarity. "Go ahead. But remember, I have enough proof to show that I never took a dime from you." I knew I was stepping into a battle I didn't want, but I also knew if I backed down now, they would think I was scared and press me harder. I sat staring at the screen for a while. My heart felt hollow. I realized this was no longer about a bag or a momentary outburst of anger. This was about power, control, and how they wanted to make me the guilty party so I would come crawling back to them. And at that moment, a thought crossed my mind that made me shudder. Maybe I had just escaped a much larger trap. Because if a man dared to slap me before we were married, dared to blame me when his faults were exposed, what else would he dare to do once we were married? I wouldn't let myself walk any further into that darkness. And I knew, starting tonight, I would never back down again. The next morning, just as I finished washing my face, the doorbell rang incessantly. I peeked outside and saw Grant's car parked in front of the gate. He came with Brenda and his father, Walter. My heart pounded. I knew this issue wouldn't be resolved easily, but I didn't expect them to show up this early in full formation. Before I could even call my parents, Brenda marched into the yard. Her steps were fast, her face cold, as if my home were a place where she had the authority to judge someone. The moment she stepped inside, before even sitting down, she threw a biting remark. "What kind of daughter did your family raise, daring to humiliate her own fiancé?" I stood before them, feeling the slight ache still lingering in my cheek, reminding me of everything that had happened. I answered calmly, "Humiliate. How so, Brenda? I only sent the facts." Brenda lifted her chin. "Facts. The fact is that your daughter is a gold digger and a show-off. She bought an expensive bag and threw a tantrum just to get her way. You think I don't know?" Grant, standing next to his mother, looked haggard like he hadn't slept, but his eyes were full of anger. He immediately played the victim. "Amelia, look at what you've done. Where am I supposed to show my face in front of my relatives? You're wasteful and don't care about the family. I was just trying to remind you, but you took our private issues public and made it a spectacle." I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a laugh at the absurdity of the situation. I looked straight at him. "My own hard-earned money. What I buy is my right. And you reminded me with 3 slaps." That sentence made the room tense. Brenda immediately slammed her hand on the table. "Is that how a woman speaks? Men can lose control when they're angry. If you were just a little more patient, what's the harm? Marriage requires peace. Your behavior is ruining everything." I didn't want to run in circles anymore. I said clearly I will not be patient in the face of physical abuse, and I will not marry someone who dares to hit me. Walter, who had been silent, finally spoke up. His voice wasn't loud, but cold and stiff. "You are young, but you don't understand the rules. After you marry, your money becomes family money. Husband and wife shouldn't be so calculating." Hearing that gave me the chills. That sentence was like the final curtain being pulled back, revealing the mindset they had harbored all along. I looked straight at him, then at Brenda and Grant. and said slowly, "Who said? I'm getting married." Those 5 words rendered the 3 of them speechless. Brenda opened her mouth to speak but choked. Grant's face changed from feigning gentleness to pure rage. He growled, "You think canceling this wedding ends everything? You've caused a scene, ruined my family's good name. You have to take responsibility." I frowned. Responsibility for what? Grant immediately threw out the line he had clearly prepared. "The wedding costs have already been paid by both sides. If you're the one canceling, you have to pay damages." I fell silent for a moment. I didn't expect them to be this brazen. They didn't come to apologize or talk things out. They came to frame me as the guilty party and extort money from me. I turned and saw my parents walking out of the house. My father's face was pale with anger while my mother was trembling. Seeing my parents, Brenda immediately raised her voice, trying to use them to pressure me. "Look at your daughter's behavior, humiliating my son, and now she wants to call off the wedding. Our family is shamed in front of our friends losing face. You can't just cancel things like this." Grant opened his briefcase, pulled out a printed spreadsheet, and slammed it onto the table in front of me like a verdict. He said confidently, "This is the breakdown of the wedding expenses. Have a look." I looked down and saw every expense clearly listed. Venue deposit, photography decorations, invitations, and then a line that made my eyes go wide. Personal loan to bride's family, $20,000. I was stunned. A $20,000 loan. I hadn't received a single penny. My family had never borrowed money from them. I raised my head and stared at Grant. My voice remained calm but turned ice cold. "When was this $20,000 given? Who received it?" Grant averted his eyes and answered quickly as if he had rehearsed it. "Our family prepared it to help with your side's expenses. You already knew about it. Why are you asking?" I looked straight at him. "Prepared to be given. Which means it hasn't been given. If it hasn't been given, why is it included in the list of expenses to force me to pay damages?" Walter frowned. "Don't play games. We already budgeted it as a wedding expense." I clenched my fists. In that moment, I realized their devious scheme. They had secretly written my name onto a fake debt, so that when the time came, they could turn me into someone who owed them, someone who had to pay damages, someone who had to submit. They wanted to intimidate me with the status of being in debt, so I would apologize and shut up. I put the paper down, raised my head, looked at them one by one, and delivered a firm sentence that silenced the entire room. "You want to play this game? Fine. From now on, we talk using proof, not just our mouths." Grant looked a bit shocked, as if he hadn't expected me to fight back. Brenda glared. "What are you trying to do?" I looked right at her. "I'm going to do the one thing you are most afraid of, making the truth completely clear." I turned to my parents, trying to reassure them. "Mom, Dad, just sit here. Let me handle this." But deep down, I knew this was only the first round of a vicious fight. And I also knew if I didn't stand tall right now, they would crush me under the label of the runaway bride who owes damages with fabricated numbers and the fake morality they always used to subjugate others. I took a deep breath. I knew there was no turning back. I placed the expense sheet back on the table, stared straight at Grant, and said firmly, "Read out every single item, loud and clear, in front of my parents. If we're talking about money, let's talk about it all the way." Grant hesitated for a moment, clearly not expecting me to demand this. Brenda glared at me sharply, while Walter frowned like he was about to explode. But I didn't back down. I wanted everything out in the open. I wouldn't give them the chance to speak in half-truths and pin everything on me. Grant picked up the paper and reluctantly read the first few items. He tried to keep his voice steady, but his annoyance bled through. Venue deposit photography invitations. I stayed silent, just staring at him. My parents sat beside me. My father clenched his fists while my mother's face was pale, a mix of anxiety and sorrow. I knew they were hurt. But I knew even better that if I didn't stand my ground today, my parents would watch their daughter be bullied even worse. Right as he reached the line, personal loan to bride's family, $20,000, I raised my hand. "Stop." I looked at Grant and asked slowly, "Who was that money given to and when?" Grant looked nervous. His eyes darted around, searching for an excuse. He stuttered, That's the money my family prepared for your family." I didn't let him wriggle out of it. I asked again. I asked who was it given to and when. If someone received it, there must be a bank transfer record, right? Brenda immediately cut in harshly. "Why are you asking that? My son was going to give it to you in cash." I nodded as if confirming something to myself, then looked straight at her. "So that means my family hasn't received a single cent, right, Brenda?" That sentence froze the room. Brenda opened her mouth to yell but couldn't because it was true. Money that was going to be given was still their money. My family hadn't received anything. Walter slammed the table, finally losing his patience. You're deliberately starting a fight. Our son prepared it for your family. That is considered a wedding expense. I looked at him calmly. I'm sorry, Walter. I'm not starting a fight. I'm just clarifying. A wedding expense is something that has actually been spent or handed over. This hasn't been handed over, no one has received it, so it cannot be used as an excuse to force me to pay damages. Grant began to lose his temper, his voice rising. What kind of game are you playing, Amelia? Do you know how much I've prepared? I stared at him. Did you prepare it, or did you have other plans for it? You accused me of scamming you. You brought this letter to extort me. So today, I'm just demanding clarity, Grant growled. I was holding that money for wedding matters. Do you think marriage is a joke? I smiled cynically. Not a challenging smile, but one born from the absurdity of the situation. Holding it for wedding matters. Or holding it for crypto investments like you once told me, that sentence drained all the color from Grant's face. Brenda and Walter simultaneously turned to their son. Walter asked in a heavy voice. What crypto? Brenda pressed him. What is she talking about, Grant? Grant stammered nothing. She's making it up. I didn't need to argue further. I just delivered a closing statement that plunged the house into dead silence. You took a massive loss, which is why you were trying to control my money, wasn't it? I looked straight into his eyes. I saw panic, anger, and then fear. Not fear of me, but fear that his parents would find out the truth. The room was pin-drop silent. My parents sat with straight backs as if their dignity had just been restored. Across from me, Brenda was no longer arrogant. Walter was breathing heavily, and Grant stood frozen like a man cornered at the edge of a cliff. I knew I had just turned the tables, and from that moment on, the game was no longer being played by their rules. The room was dead silent, so quiet that I could hear Walter's heavy breathing. Brenda no longer sat up straight like when she first arrived. Her eyes darted nervously between me and Grant as if looking for something to anchor onto. Meanwhile, Grant stood frozen beside the table, his fists clenched so tight his veins popped. I knew the word crypto had struck his weakest spot. Brenda was the first to break the silence. Her voice was higher than usual, sounding like an interrogation. What crypto? Explain to me what she's talking about. Grant immediately yelled like a cornered animal. There's nothing. She's making it up. After saying that, he glared at me with a threatening look, silently ordering me to shut up. I didn't answer right away. I calmly unlocked my phone and searched for an old chat history that I had previously tried to forget. I remembered vividly that about a month ago, Grant sent me a text late at night. His tone was incredibly sweet. Amelia, can you help me out for a bit? I need some funds. When I asked what for, he gave a vague answer. Just for a quick investment, I'll return it in a few days. He asked me to take out an online loan under my name for $10,000. He asked, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. You take it out under your name and I'll make the payments. You trust me, right? At the time, I politely declined, saying I didn't want to take the risk. Grant sulked for a bit, saying, You don't trust me. I just assumed he needed urgent cash for work. I never suspected it was a sign of a much deeper hole. I held up my phone screen in front of Walter and Brenda. My voice was slow and clear. These are the messages where Grant asked me to borrow $10,000 for an investment. Not just once. He even told me, Don't tell anyone, I don't want Mom and Dad to worry. Brenda gasped. Walter furrowed his brow. Grant stepped forward, his voice a low growl. What are you trying to do? Don't drag our private conversations into this. I raised my head and gave him a cold stare. You brought a list of expenses to force me to pay damages. Now you're talking about privacy. I turned to his parents. Let me explain everything so you aren't lied to anymore. Grant lost over $50,000. He was terrified that after getting married he wouldn't be able to pay off his debts. That's why he wanted to control my savings. I didn't say it in anger. I said it like I was reading a conclusion to a report. My father, who had been holding himself back this whole time, slammed the table hard. The loud bang made everyone jump. My dad stood up, his face flushed red. So you wanted to marry my daughter to cover your debts. That question hit the room like a sledgehammer. My mother clutched her chest, her eyes red. Dear God, what kind of man? Grant turned to me, his eyes bulging, screaming as if volume could cover it all up. How dare you say that in front of my parents? Do you want to destroy my family? He pointed a finger right at my face, the exact same attitude. Bossing. Bullying. I stared right at his pointing finger, then into his eyes, and answered with one short sentence that silenced him. You dared to slap me in public. Grant choked on his words. Walter turned to his son. His voice was low but heavy. You really hit her. Grant opened his mouth to deny it, but ultimately stayed quiet. Brenda looked at her son, as if she were looking at a stranger. I saw the confusion in her eyes clearly. The absolute certainty of a mother who had come demanding justice was gone. Perhaps for the first time, she realized her son wasn't the victim. He was the perpetrator who fabricated another story to cover up his own mistakes. But I also knew people like them wouldn't accept defeat easily. To them, pride isn't about right or wrong. It's about making sure outsiders never find out. I saw Brenda swallow hard, her hands shaking. Then she turned to me, changing her tactics again. Amelia, let's talk about this again later at home. Okay, don't blow this out of proportion. Think about what you're saying. I knew they still wanted me to stay quiet to keep my mouth shut so they could find a way out. Grant also changed his tone not to an apology but to a subtle threat. You really enjoy humiliating me like this, huh? You think after this everything is over? I looked at him without a shred of fear. I knew he was panicking, and panicked people often act recklessly. At that moment, I saw Brenda's look and realized she had already chosen to protect the family's image at any cost. And I realized something far more terrifying. When someone is cornered but desperate to save face, they will take even crueler steps to turn the tables. I didn't know what they were going to do yet, but my gut told me the real storm was still coming. After the confrontation at my house that day, they left with obvious frustration and confusion. Walter walked out first, his face as hard as stone. Brenda followed behind him, occasionally glancing back at me with a look that was no longer sharp but calculating. Grant, before getting into the car, paused and glared at me with his lips pressed tightly together. I knew that look wasn't remorse. It was an unspoken promise. He wouldn't just sit back. 2 days later, exactly as my intuition warned, I was attacked in the most deceitful way possible. That morning, as soon as I arrived at the office, a coworker pulled me into a corner and whispered anxiously, "Amelia, have you seen this?" She showed me her phone. On the screen was a post in a local community Facebook group. The writing style was like a personal vent, but every single word stabbed directly at my honor. There is a girl who demanded an incredibly lavish wedding. The groom's side had prepared everything, but at the last minute she threw a fit because she has expensive taste and loves to shop for luxury goods. She even badmouthed her fiancé. The post didn't mention my name, but the details matched perfectly. The timing, the situation, even a line about how the groom's family had offered to help with a $20,000 gift. Reading it, my hands went cold. And it didn't stop there. Below the text was a photo of me holding the bag at the mall, but it had been maliciously edited. The background was changed, the lighting adjusted to make it look like I was showing off. They even added a mocking caption, "Wants to marry into a good family." But with a lifestyle like this, who can afford her? Every word I read made my blood boil. Not because I was afraid of being badmouthed, but because they dared to fabricate a story, twist the facts, and turn me from a victim into a greedy villain. Before I could react, my phone buzzed. A message from Grant popped up as cold as a blade. "If you want a war, I'll give you one until the end." I stared at the message and suddenly realized they didn't care who was right or wrong. They just wanted to win. And their way of winning was to humiliate me until I surrendered, deleted the video, and apologized just to buy peace. Grant sent another message like an ultimatum. "Delete the video, post a public apology. Then, I'll give you a way out." I placed my phone on the desk, taking a deep breath. I understood this tactic perfectly. It was an attack on a woman's reputation, especially one my age. Just slapping on the labels of gold digger, wasteful, and unstable was enough to assassinate my character. Friends started texting me. Some asked Amelia, "What's really going on?" Others asked hesitantly, "Why did it get so complicated?" At the office, coworkers walking past my desk whispered. I could faintly hear words like high maintenance, canceled wedding, wasteful. Every word felt like a needle. At noon, when I went down to the cafeteria, several pairs of eyes immediately turned to me. I'm not weak, but the feeling of being looked at with suspicion was absolute torture. It didn't hurt like a slap, but it felt like being slowly choked. I sat down, and the food in front of me suddenly tasted like ash. I knew if I didn't act fast, this story would spread further, and they would succeed in shaming me into silence. Right at that moment, Brenda called. As soon as I picked up, she spoke in a cold tone disguised as advice. "You've seen it right. Once a girl has a bad reputation, who else would want her? If you want peace, listen to me. Delete the video, apologize, and let's consider the matter closed." I gripped my phone tightly. My voice was calm but firm. "You are threatening me." Brenda let out a cynical laugh. "Threatening, I'm just stating facts. When a woman's reputation is ruined, she suffers for the rest of her life." I replied plainly. "I don't need anyone to marry me." There was silence on the other end. Then she growled, "If you talk like that, don't come crying later." I said matter-of-factly. The only thing I'd regret is the person who hit me and then fabricated a story to ruin me. Then I hung up. My hands were still shaking as I ended the call, but not out of fear, out of sheer anger. I realized she didn't care about me as a future daughter-in-law at all. She only cared about her family's image. That afternoon, Grant texted again. The tone was a mix of threat and coercion. If you don't delete that video, I will sue you for defamation. I stared at the words and felt the irony. The person who hit me in public was now threatening to sue me because I told the truth. I was no longer emotional. I just felt pity for the good name they were trying to protect by any means necessary, including destroying a woman. Just as I was about to reply, another message popped up from an unknown number. It was brief, but it felt like a door suddenly swinging wide open. I am Grant's ex-girlfriend. I think you need to know the truth before it's too late. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Ex-girlfriend, I had assumed Grant only had a few casual past relationships. He had always talked about it so nonchalantly, as if his past was squeaky clean. But now someone had deliberately reached out to me, using the words, "before it's too late." I sat in silence for a long time. The defamatory post, the suspicious stares at the office, Brenda's threats, Grant's legal threats. Suddenly, it all connected into one clear line. They were backing me into a corner to shut me up. But this stranger's appearance right at this moment signaled that there was a much bigger secret hiding behind it all. I no longer felt this was just about a canceled wedding. I felt like I had just touched a web of lies Grant had been spinning for a long time. And if I wasn't careful, I would just be the next victim on his list. After receiving the message from the strange woman, I didn't reply immediately. I sat quietly for a moment, thinking about what I needed most right now. I didn't need to argue on the internet, I didn't need to fight, and I didn't need to prove anything to people who were just nosy. I only needed one chance to lay everything out clearly in front of the very people who had dragged me into this mess, so they would no longer have any loopholes to twist the facts. I sent a short text to Grant tomorrow afternoon at 3. The cafe at the mall ground floor where it's crowded. Bring your parents. We are ending this. He replied instantly. His tone was still arrogant, as if he were the one in control. Coming to apologize, make it quick, I'm busy. I read the message and knew he still thought I was going to surrender, terrified of public opinion and the stigma. I texted back, not apologizing, we are settling this. The next day, I arrived early. I chose a table in a high-traffic area, not to show off, but to prevent them from dragging me into a quiet corner and pressuring me like they did at my house. I brought my tablet with everything organized, audio files, videos, screenshots. I wanted this meeting to run like a confrontation, questions, evidence, and a conclusion. At exactly 3 p.m., Grant walked in first. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, his hair styled, walking with a swagger, as if he had come to teach me another lesson. Behind him were Brenda and Walter. Brenda looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the crowded setting. I guess she didn't like airing dirty laundry in public, but they were the ones who had forced me to this point. Grant sat down without a greeting and immediately said dismissively, "What are you apologizing for? Make it quick." I looked straight at him, so calm that even I was surprised. "I'm not here to apologize today. I'm here to expose everything." Brenda's eyes widened. "Expose what?" I nodded, without flinching. "The truth, because for the past few days your family has been spreading slander to ruin my name. I cannot stay silent." Walter frowned. "How long are you going to keep blowing this out of proportion?" I placed the tablet on the table. My voice was flat. "The size of this issue isn't determined by me. It was determined by your son, the moment he slapped me and fabricated a $20,000 debt to extort me." Grant slammed the table lightly. "Stop it. What do you actually want money?" I let out a cynical laugh. "If I wanted money, I would have kept my mouth shut and married you." I didn't say anything else. I played the audio recording of a phone call from the day before, the part where Grant said, "Delete the video and I'll give you a way out. After we get married, I'll use your money to make some investments. I'll pay it back. Don't make things hard for me right now." The entire table froze. I saw Brenda look as though she had been slapped. She stood up, her voice cracking. "What is the meaning of this, Grant?" Grant went completely pale. By reflex, he lunged across the table to grab my tablet, but I had anticipated it and pulled back, gripping it tightly while saying loudly, "Don't forget I have backups." Grant was furious. "You recorded me." I looked at him dead in the eye. "I didn't trick you. You're the one who said it. I just saved it." Brenda turned to her son, a mix of anger and panic on her face. "You really have debts. You really plan to use her money." Grant gritted his teeth. "Mom, be quiet. Don't listen to her." Walter's face turned red, not from anger at me, but from sheer humiliation. What the hell is this behavior, Grant? I didn't let them change the subject. I switched to the video from the mall. The loud smack cut through the ambient noise of the cafe. A few people at the surrounding tables turned to look. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God, he actually hit her." Grant tried to look calm, but I could see his neck tense up and his hands clenched tight. I paused the video right when he said, "That money should have been for a gift for my mom and dad." I looked straight at Grant. My voice was low but heavy. 3 slaps. You said it was because you were emotional, but this is your character. Your character that thinks my money is your money. Your character that uses violence to instill fear. And your character that fabricates stories to turn the tables as if I were the guilty one? Grant stood up screaming so loud the whole cafe went silent. "You're destroying me." I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him and answered coldly. "Not me. You destroyed yourself." I turned to Brenda and Walter to deliver my closing statement. "I didn't invite you here to ask for your blessing again. I came here to say once and for all, I am canceling this wedding. And starting today, if your family continues to spread slander, I will use all this evidence to take legal action. I am not playing around." Brenda collapsed back into her chair, her face ashen. Walter was breathing heavily, his eyes red with rage. And Grant stood there, looking as if his mask had just been violently ripped off in front of everyone. I knew the climax of this drama had hit, and I also knew that when a manipulator loses control in public, he won't surrender with an apology. He will try to attack. But I was ready. The atmosphere in the cafe was so tense it felt like everyone was holding their breath. Grant stood stiffly pale but still trying to hold his ground. Brenda slumped weakly, her hands shaking. Walter sat in silence, his jaw clenched tight in a mix of shame and rage. I knew I had just demolished their entire charade, but I also understood that for someone like Grant, public humiliation isn't the end. It's a trigger for a tantrum. Grant glared at me, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're so great, huh? What did you do all this for? You want me to get on my knees and beg you?" I answered calmly. "I don't need you on your knees. I just need you to stop making up stories and stop hurting other people." He gave a dry laugh. "Stop! Who do you think you are to give me orders?" He then turned to his parents, desperately trying to regain control. "Dad, Mom, don't listen to her. She fabricated all this to ruin our wedding." "To humiliate me, Brenda?" Like a drowning woman clung to his words immediately. That's right. She's holding a grudge. She wants to destroy our family." I didn't argue anymore. I just looked straight at Brenda and said softly, "Brenda, if I wanted to destroy you, I wouldn't have invited you here. I just wanted you to hear the truth." Walter let out a heavy sigh, his eyes red. "What truth?" "Everything is clear right here." Grant snapped at his father. "You believe her too. You trust an outsider over your own son." Right at that moment, a woman's voice rang out from behind me, clear and cold. "He did the exact same thing to me." That sentence sliced through the tension like a knife. I turned around. The woman walking in was the same one who had texted me. She looked to be around my age, dressed simply. Her face showed no intent to brawl, only a deep, profound exhaustion. She walked straight to our table. She wasn't looking at me, but at Grant. Grant jolted, stammering. "Lauren, what are you doing here?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She placed a thick folder of documents on the table, followed by an envelope. Then she spoke without any small talk. "I'm here to put an end to your habit of using women as your wallets and using marriage proposals as bait." Brenda frowned. "Who are you?" The woman lifted her head. Her voice was calm but piercing. "I am the person who almost married your son, and I was also painted as a gold digger by him, just like Amelia here." She opened the folder, pulled out several sheets of paper, and laid them in front of Walter and Brenda. "These are loan agreements. These are transfer receipts. These are the messages where he promised to marry me, so I would give him capital for his businesses." She paused for a second, then placed one final piece of paper down. "And this is a confession of debt for over $60,000. I saw Brenda's eyes bulge in disbelief. Walter picked up the paper with trembling hands. Grant stood, froze in his throat, bobbing as if he were struggling to swallow. He tried to laugh, but it sounded completely off. "You're crazy. You fabricated all this." The woman gave a cynical smile, a smile devoid of anger, containing only contempt. "I was crazy when I still trusted you. Now I'm wide awake." She pulled out her phone and showed something. "I even kept the texts where you threatened me. You said if I asked for my money back, you would leak our private photos. You'd say I was the one obsessively chasing you and you'd ruin my reputation so I couldn't show my face anywhere. Remember, Brenda stood up in a panic. "Grant, you blackmailed someone." Grant roared like a wounded animal. "Mom, shut up. Don't listen to her. She wants to destroy me." Walter slammed his hand on the table, still holding the paper. "Answer me. Is this debt real or not?" Grant wailed, his face flushed red. "Everyone is cornering me. Everyone wants me ruined." "Fine. Yes." His outburst made the entire cafe stare even harder. Some people shook their heads looking at Grant in disgust. The more he felt watched, the more he lost control. Watching the scene unfold, I was no longer afraid. I just saw clearly that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern of controlling, exploiting, and then blaming. I turned to Grant's parents. "Now, do you still want to call me a gold digger?" Brenda was at a loss for words, her lips trembling. Walter looked down, his eyes red with anger and profound shame. I think that was the moment they realized that what they were trying to protect wasn't their family's good name, but a facade that was already rotting from the inside out. The woman glanced at me, a look of silent solidarity. Then she spoke as if summarizing everything. "He doesn't need love. He just needs someone who will give him money and keep her mouth shut." Hearing that, Grant lunged forward, his voice hoarse. "Shut up!" I immediately stood up, not shouting, but delivering one sentence that stopped him in his tracks. "Stay right where you are. If you dare lay a hand on anyone else, I am calling security right now." Grant stopped, his eyes bulging, but he didn't dare do anything reckless in a place this crowded. I looked him dead in the eye and said the words I had been holding on to for a long time. "You didn't lose me over a handbag. You lost me because of your lies." Grant stood there as if he'd been drenched in ice water. Brenda collapsed into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Walter turned his face away as if unable to bear looking at anyone. The woman gathered her documents. "I didn't come here to cause a scene. I came here to make sure he doesn't scam another woman." I knew this bombshell was a fatal blow. Grant wasn't just broke. He was a systematic, romantic, and financial fraud. And when the truth was laid bare in front of his parents, in front of me, in front of his other victim, and in front of everyone in that cafe, Grant had no way back. But I also knew he wouldn't surrender with an apology. He would look for another way to save himself, even if he had to drag everyone else down with him. The cafe felt like it was holding its collective breath. The woman's arrival and her mountain of evidence had demolished whatever defenses Grant had left. I thought he would freeze, try to hustle his parents out of there, and figure out a new strategy later. But no. Cornered Grant didn't choose to apologize. He chose to expose his true nature so nakedly that I shuddered, feeling incredibly lucky. Lucky that I saw it before it was too late. Grant suddenly stood up straight, his eyes bloodshot, pointing directly at my face. His voice cracked as he yelled, "Yes, I need money. So what? Isn't it a wife's job to support her husband?" That sentence echoed through the cafe like a fourth slap. Not to me, but to all the logic and dignity I had ever believed about marriage. People at the next table turned around, some scoffing in disgust. I could hear whispers spreading rapidly, whispers of horror and anger. Brenda stood up, stammering. "Gee, Grant, what are you saying?" Walter's face was purple, his voice heavy with suppressed shame. "You are truly making us lose face." But Grant just laughed. A cynical, bitter laugh. "Lose face? Is your face more important than your own son?" I saw Walter flinch, as if he'd been struck physically. He went silent, his eyes blinking rapidly. Brenda covered her mouth, unable to believe those words came from her golden boy. Grant kept going as if vomiting out all the rot inside him. "I'm trying to build a business. I need funds. If she marries me, she has to share my burden." The woman let out a cynical laugh. "Share your burden. You're calling fraud. Sharing a burden." Grant spun around and roared. "Shut up! You have no right to speak about my life." He turned back to me, his eyes filled with pure hatred. "You think you're so pure. You're just as selfish. You just wanted to get married for the status. If you don't want to, fine. But don't destroy me." I stared at him. Oddly enough, I no longer felt sad or angry. I just felt relieved, like someone who had finally stepped out of a suffocating room they had been trapped in for ages. I looked straight into his bloodshot eyes and realized this was who he truly was. The sweet man at the beginning of our relationship was just a coat of paint. Underneath was a core of pure greed, someone who demeaned women and saw marriage as nothing more than a transaction. Walter was shaking, gripping the debt confession letter on the table, his voice choked with rage. "You want to drag this entire family through the mud, huh? Do you know how your mother and I are going to face our friends now?" Grant smirked, dropping a chilling response. "Face them how? Just act normal. You two are always terrified of what people say anyway." That line was like a dagger straight to his parents' hearts. I saw Brenda slump in her chair, her eyes red not out of pity for her son, but because her dream was shattered. Perhaps she never imagined that the son she always defended would dare to declare that to him, his parents were nothing but human shields. The situation was spiraling out of control. Some customers opted to move to different tables. I heard a girl nearby whisper, "Ugh, what a creep. That's abuse." I didn't want this to drag out into an even longer spectacle. I'd had enough. I didn't need to win a screaming match. I just needed to end this with a definitive action. I stepped forward, standing face to face with Grant. My voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. "You once said that my money would become your family's money. But you forgot one thing. I will never be part of your family." Grant went silent, looking as if he'd been gut-punched. Brenda looked up at me, her eyes a mix of confusion and shame. Walter stared at the floor, saying nothing. I raised my hand and slipped the engagement ring off my finger. The ring I had once looked at with such hope, thinking it would be the start of a new life. Now in my hand it felt light and meaningless. I placed it on the table right in the middle of the pile of debt letters, text, screenshots, and all the evidence of his corruption. It made a very soft clink, but to me it was the sound of a door locking shut. I looked dead at Grant and stated clearly without a tremor, without a doubt, I am officially calling off this wedding. And I do not owe you a single cent. Grant opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just lost his very last lifeline. He stared at the ring, then at me. There was a flash of panic in his eyes. Maybe that was the moment he finally realized the woman standing in front of him was no longer someone who could be threatened with a canceled wedding or coerced with bogus damages. I had cut the very rope he planned to tie me down with. The woman gathered her documents, stood up, and looked at Grant coldly. "You think all women will just stay patient to hold a marriage together? No. There will always be those brave enough to stand up and walk away." She turned to me and gave a small nod, a silent greeting. I nodded back. We didn't need to be friends. Mutual understanding was enough. Brenda began to cry. But it wasn't her arrogant crying anymore. It was the tears of a mother realizing she had failed in raising her son. Walter stood up, his voice hoarse. "Let's go home." He didn't look at me or at Grant. He was just talking to himself and his wife. Grant stood frozen for a few seconds, then suddenly laughed. A laugh full of bitterness that sounded incredibly hollow. I looked at him and knew people like him don't accept defeat by backing down. They try to drag others down with them so they don't feel like they lost alone. But I also knew that the moment I placed that ring on the table, the game had changed. I was no longer caught in his current. I was the one who ended it. And that was what hurt him the most. Leaving the cafe that day, I didn't feel triumphant the way people might imagine. I only felt relief, a relief mixed with deep exhaustion. Exhausted from having to pull myself out of a trap. Exhausted from having to stand tall in the face of sheer deceit. And exhausted from realizing that there are people willing to do absolutely anything to maintain their masks, even if it means trampling on others. I went home and slept incredibly well. But the moment I opened my eyes the next morning, I knew the fallout wasn't over. When a mask is torn, whatever hides beneath it begins to crumble piece by piece. In just 2 days, the video from the mall and the evidence presented by the other woman began to spread wider than I anticipated. It started in the family group chats, then moved to friends of friends. People at the office who had previously stayed silent started asking if the rumors were true. I didn't post anything else on social media. I just let what I had already sent serve as my defense. But that's how life works. The more you try to cover something up, the more curious people become. At the office, my coworkers' attitudes shifted drastically. Those who had looked at me with suspicion now looked at me with sympathy. The coworker who had shown me the defamatory post pulled me aside in the hallway. "Amelia, I'm so sorry. I doubted you for a second there, but now I get it." I just nodded. I understood human psychology. Everyone is afraid of getting dragged into drama, but at that moment I felt much lighter because at least the people around me were starting to see the truth. On the third day, I received a text from an unknown number. It turned out to be Grant's coworker. He kept it brief. "Hey, just giving you a heads up. Grant got called in by HR. He's been temporarily suspended for unprofessional conduct that reflects poorly on the company." I read it without surprise. A sales manager involved in a scandal of hitting a woman and drowning in debt rumors. No company wants to take on that risk. I wasn't happy he was suspended. I just saw it as a consequence. Then the debt collectors started calling his house. At first, it was just relentless phone calls, which quickly escalated. I knew this because one of his distant relatives frantically called my mother. "It's total chaos over here. People are calling nonstop threatening them." Hearing that sent a chill down my spine. Not out of pity for Grant, but out of cold realization. If I had married him, all that chaos would have spilled over to my life. They would be calling me, demanding money from me, and dragging my parents into the middle of the mess. Just thinking about it made me realize those 3 slaps were an absolute blessing in disguise. While I was at work, my phone rang. Brenda. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before picking up. Her voice was no longer arrogant. She sounded hoarse, exhausted, and slightly pleading. Amelia, could you take down some of those posts? What people are saying is going too far. Our family can't take it anymore. I found it ironic, but I didn't show it. I simply answered calmly. I didn't make anything up, Brenda. I only told the truth. Brenda went silent for a moment, then spoke as if trying to elicit sympathy. I know you were wronged, but people are harassing us now. His father is sick with worry. Grant is. I cut her off gently. Brenda, if you want people to stop talking, you need to ask your son to stop lying first. I cannot stay silent to protect his mistakes. She choked. I heard a heavy sigh on the other end, then a faint, defeated voice. I never thought it would turn out like this. I didn't reply. I ended the call. My heart didn't feel victorious. There was only a sense of quiet emptiness. People only start begging when they feel they have no way out. That same day, Grant sent his final message. It was short, but I understood the meaning perfectly. You win. I stared at the screen, then set the phone down like a small stone. I replied with one word, no. Then I added, I just defended myself. I refused to accept the word win, because if this was considered a victory, it meant I had already lost from the very beginning the moment I mistakenly loved the wrong person. The only thing I could do was stop in time and pull myself out of the hole before I was buried any deeper. A week later, I heard that Grant was forced to sell his car to pay off his debts. That news came from the same relative who used to constantly make snide remarks about me. This time when she called, her tone was much lower. Amelia, oh well, maybe it's for the best. He sold his car, and his family dropped the idea of suing for damages. Just consider the matter closed. I just replied, yes. Not because I pitied them, but because I knew they dropped the lawsuit not out of the goodness of their hearts, but because they were terrified of losing even more. Gradually, my friends came to understand the whole story. My coworkers stopped whispering. Everything went back to normal slowly but surely. I didn't need pity. I only needed the truth to be able to stand on my own. And when the dust settled, I realized the ultimate irony. The man who had threatened me with who would want to marry you later was now the one being shunned by his own circles. Not because of me, but because of his own actions. When someone lives behind a mask, once that mask falls, all that's left is emptiness. As for me, even though I was slapped, slandered, and threatened, I still had one thing left: my dignity. And because of that, I was able to stand back up. Months passed since the day I placed that ring on the table and walked out of the cafe. Everything slowly settled like the surface of a lake after a storm. People stopped talking about the story. I no longer woke up in the middle of the night to threatening texts or had to mentally prepare for suspicious stares. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Work in the morning, home in the evening, and weekends spent drinking coffee with my parents talking about simple things. I no longer felt pain when I remembered those 3 slaps. Sometimes when looking in the mirror, I'd recall the burning sensation on my cheek from that day. But the memory didn't make me tremble anymore. It was like a healed scar, still there but no longer bleeding. One weekend afternoon, while stopped at a red light, I saw a man standing across the street. I didn't pay attention at first, but then my eyes locked onto him. It was Grant. He looked thinner, his cheeks hollow, his clothes no longer as sharp as they used to be. The eyes that were once arrogant and cold now looked exhausted and empty. The light was still red. He saw me too. We stood facing each other, separated by the road, but I felt the distance between us was an entirely closed chapter of life. When the light turned green, he crossed and stopped a few steps away from me. There was no more arrogance or threatening glare. His voice was much softer than I had ever heard. Amelia. I turned off my car engine and sat still. There was no anger, no desire to avoid him. He looked down slightly, then said, very softly, I was wrong. Just 3 words. But I could hear more exhaustion than genuine remorse in them. Perhaps he had paid the price in other ways. Perhaps what happened afterward was enough to make him realize his mistakes, but I no longer had any desire to dig deeper. I looked at him and said gently, without sarcasm or bitterness, "Thank you for slapping me that day." He snapped his head up in shock. He probably thought I was going to berate him, bring up the past, or insult him, but I didn't. I continued in the same flat tone. If it weren't for those 3 slaps, I probably would have entered a marriage that was far more painful. He stood frozen. I no longer saw anger in his eyes, only emptiness. Maybe for the first time he realized he had lost someone not because she was a gold digger or flighty, but because he had chosen to be the man he was. I didn't say anything else. There were no more accusations, no more advice. I put the car in drive and pulled away. As I drove off, I didn't look back. Not out of hatred, but because there was nothing left to see. That night, I opened my closet and took out the handbag that had triggered it all. It still looked brand new, just like the day I bought it. Many people asked why I didn't just sell it since it held such bad memories. But I kept it. Not for its price tag. I kept it because it reminded me of a boundary. That bag wasn't the reason I was slapped. That bag was the reason I realized I deserved to be respected. I bought it with the money from my own hard work, and I had every right to do so. Just as I had every right to walk away from a man who didn't know how to respect me, those 3 slaps that day almost turned me into a victim. If I had stayed silent, if I had been afraid, if I had accepted the demand to apologize just for the sake of peace, I might be living in a house right now where my voice meant nothing. Maybe every time I wanted to buy something, I'd have to watch someone else's facial expressions. Maybe every time there was a conflict, that hand would be raised again and I would tell myself, just be a little more patient for the sake of peace. But I didn't choose that path. I don't consider myself stronger than anyone else. I was also confused. I was also terrified of being labeled a runaway bride. I also worried about the stares of relatives and the whispers of outsiders. I am just an ordinary woman who wanted a whole, loving marriage. I simply realized one very basic truth. A marriage cannot be built on a foundation of disrespect. A family cannot begin with a slap. A few months later, while having coffee with my mom, she said softly, "Back then, I was so afraid you'd be heartbroken." I smiled, placing my hand over hers. "I was heartbroken, Mom, but I have no regrets." My mom looked at me, her eyes tearing up but reflecting pure relief. Perhaps for a mother, what matters most isn't whether her daughter manages to get married or not, but whether her daughter can still protect her dignity. I still believe in marriage. I still believe there are good men out there who know how to respect women. I'm just not in a rush anymore. I know that at this age, people are afraid of being too late, afraid of being left behind, afraid of becoming gossip, but I would much rather walk slowly than walk in the wrong direction. Those 3 slaps from that year are no longer a disgrace. They are a reminder. A reminder that the first time someone raises a hand to you, the most terrifying thing isn't the force of the slap itself, but the silence that follows it.